Hey everybody, welcome to The Edge on the Tip of the Spear broadcast. Here we dive into what the Bible says about topics that matter to people, such as spiritual warfare, spiritual growth, overcoming life's challenges, and issues you might not hear about on a typical Sunday morning or even a Wednesday night. By addressing these subjects, we hope to cultivate a more robust Christian worldview and foster in our personal discipleship a growth that can take us to the next level spiritually, becoming more like Christ. And so we're excited that you have joined us today. And so before we get started, be sure to like, subscribe, and share the broadcast to help us reach as many people as possible and to overcome the algorithm, right? So anyway, thanks for joining us. And so let's get started. So the issue we want to tackle today is what is depression? And it's an issue that you hear the term thrown around a lot. And in our society, a lot of people are becoming depressed. And we want to delve into this because this is typically not touched on a typical Sunday morning or Wednesday night. And even, unfortunately, it's not sometimes being addressed in Christian counseling. Unfortunately, a lot of people are becoming depressed because of all that's going on in the world and all kinds of psychological issues that are happening from not only a mental and emotional standpoint, but also a spiritual standpoint. So there's a lot going on. So anyway, what is depression? So let's define that, and then we'll talk about it, how depression is treated, okay? What most people misunderstand is depression is not simply having the blues, okay? You can get the blues to a response of difficult events happening in your life. Like, hey, today didn't go well, you got a flat tire, or your boss chewed you out at work or whatever it was, or you came home and the dog is sick or the cat is sick and now you got to run to the vet. So it messed up a lot of your day. Car broke down, something at work didn't go right. You ate something bad and you got food poisoned. And so that added to the frustration of your life. And anyway, those are setbacks. Those are typical of life, right? And we all have to deal with them at certain points in time. And they may make us feel down or give us the blues. But typically with those situations, we rebound. We have our coping skills. We have our biblical coping skills. And we manage our way through that. We rebound and we come back. No problem. So don't mistake having the blues as depression. Those are just the normal part of life. And the issue is you have to recognize the trials and setbacks and that, hey, Jesus said, in this life, you will have trials and tribulations. And so we're reminded of what Jesus said. So you have to learn the coping skills from the Bible to roll with the punches, right? You get yourself into the Word, you pray, you get around other believers, you fellowship, you go to church, you go to Bible study, and that brings you back. Those are the coping skills necessary. And those are specific. When you have the blues, they're specifically tied to certain issues. My car broke down. The dog died or something like that, right? That they're identifiable and you can target that, right? So that's not depression, okay? If you can target it and identify it and where it's coming from and realize, okay, this is a normal part of life, I can bounce back, then okay, that's just part of normality, and you have to understand that. The second aspect that typically people get confused on about depression is, their mood a lot of times. And their mood is sometimes tied to their circumstances. Perhaps, they're in a season of life, like for example, now all the kids have moved out of the home and now they're an empty nester. And so they have this empty feeling, which is normal, right? But that's not depression. That's empty nest syndrome, right? That you can point to. Or someone retires from their job after working 30, 40 years. And now, you'd think they would be happy now that they don't have to work, but what we find out is a lot of people retire and then they hit a lull because they lose their purpose in life, they lose their identity in life, and they go through this little lull. They typically come out of it, but that's a season of life that's tied to retirement. Or maybe they got fired, they lost their job, or maybe they lost a relationship. Maybe they were married and got divorced. Maybe they're having an illness. Maybe it's not life-threatening, but it's definitely going to limit their health, and how they can function. Maybe they're going to have to be on medication the rest of their life or whatever like that. Well, those are seasons of life, okay? And those can bring us down, no doubt about that. But that's not depression either. Those are seasons of life where, hey, I just got retired. Now the issue then is I got to find something new for my life, or if I got fired, I got to find another job, right? Or now that my health is messed up and maybe my thyroid's messed up, or maybe I have pain in my lower back or whatever it is. Now I have to be on pain medication, or maybe I have to take thyroid medication for the rest of my life. Okay. That's not depression. That's a season of life that's difficult to deal with, and you can rebound from that. You can do the right things and get counseling, and you can obviously use your biblical coping skills, the Bible, prayer, going to church, all those other things to help you get through that. And typically people do, okay? So those are normal seasons of life. They're not the greatest seasons of life, right? But they are part of normal life. And you have to recognize that. And you can bounce back from that, okay? And it's identifiable. That's another trait. It's identifiable. Hey, I got this diagnosis that I'm going to have to be on, I have diabetes or whatever it is. I'm going to have to change my diet. That's a normal part of life. That's not depression, okay? Sometimes there's grief, and grief can turn into depression, but there's a lot of things where, people have grief. They lost a loved one, but grief is in certain degrees. Like, for instance, if your grandmother died at 110, most people can grieve that normally and make the adjustment pretty good because that's expected. That's the person lived a full life, and their health was declining, and you didn't want to see them in that state, and they lived to be 110, okay? And when they pass away, especially if they know the Lord, it's an easier adjustment. There's no doubt about that. Versus, the tragedy of losing a child or a teenager or someone that's young. That's different. But you have to understand what case of grief you have, right? And adjust accordingly. If a major trauma hits you, no doubt about that, you've got to seek help. You got to see a counselor, stuff like that. But if it does turn into depression, what starts happening with depression is you can't identify why you're feeling depressed. Okay, that's one of the key understandings. Now, you might be able to trace it with some counseling help to certain things psychologically that how you're thinking. But generally speaking, when someone has depression, they don't know why they feel this way. They just feel bad. They feel down. They feel low. And it starts having biological effects on them. Their diet starts changing. They start eating differently. Sometimes they eat too much. Sometimes they eat too little. But they generally feel stuck, right? They can't move, and they feel distressed, and they want to start feeling like isolating themselves and getting away from people and stuff like that. And so what you have to understand about depression is it is a mood disorder, okay? A mood disorder. And sometimes that could be psychological. Sometimes it could be a chemistry issue, a biological issue in the person that's going on. And what ends up happening when you have depression, biologically, you will start losing function of your body in many ways. because it's a biological issue many times, okay? The way you want to think about your body and your soul and your spirit, which you're a tripart creation of God, is that if your body's not functioning correctly, it's like a machine, right? And if you think it in those terms, or a computer or whatever, and if it's not functioning correctly, it's not doing the things it's meant to do. And the body there is supporting the soul and the spirit. So when the body doesn't work, the soul and the spirit suffer as well. So like if you have health issues, it can affect your soul because you're tied together to your body. And this is the issue with the depression. And if something's malfunctioning in your chemistry and in your body, then it definitely will affect your soul. It'll affect your thinking. It'll affect how you believe. It'll affect all kinds of things. And you have to understand that the machine part of you is broken. And it could be from a trauma. It could be from a genetic line. Like, for instance, if you have depression in your family, there's a good chance you might have it genetically too. Maybe, maybe not, but sometimes it's tied genetically. Some people are predisposed to be more negative in their thinking. We call that neuroticism. And there's people that are born with a scowl on their face. They're kind of, their genetics are making them predisposed towards being more negative about that. It doesn't give them an excuse for that, right? But we have seen that people sometimes are more predisposed towards depression than other people, especially if they're highly neurotic, if they have highly neurotic traits, which means they process things very negatively in life, okay? And that doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not. That's just your biology, and things are affecting you that way. And it can be passed on. So technically speaking, if it's a biological or chemistry issue, and not to get too technical, but just to understand, this is not a spiritual issue of you praying more or of you reading the Bible more. That's the mistake a lot of pastors make in diagnosing depression or trying to deal with someone that's depressed, is they try to make it a spiritual issue when it's actually not. If it's truly depression, then what's happening is the serotonin and the dopamine levels in them, which are the neurotransmitters in their brain, are basically, another way, they're chemical messengers, right? So when the serotonin and dopamine levels do not enable communication between nerve cells and other parts of the body, the person can suffer with depression or all kinds of other things. It can affect their mood, it can affect their memory, and a lot of other issues in their body. So again, I want to relieve you that if you're saying, I think I feel depressed, I think there's something wrong with me deep down inside, well, it could be your serotonin and dopamine neurotransmitters. Now, here's the problem. You're going to have to see a doctor for that. That's not something a pastor can solve. That's not me telling you, go read this passage and you're going to feel better, okay? That is you having a physical problem in your machine, your body, and that needs to be fixed. When people say, well, I don't want to take medication. Well, do you still want to feel bad every day? Because if you don't get your serotonin levels and your dopamine levels to be at the right levels, they will not communicate between the nerve cells, okay? And it will affect you and cause you depression. So when people say, well, I don't want to be on medication. Well, look, if you have diabetes, you're going to have to be on medication. If you have thyroid problems, you're going to have to be on medication. If you have heart disease, you're going to have to be on medication. You know, at what point do you give in and realize, wait a second, there's something broken inside of me, in my body. It's not even a psychological thing. It's not even a belief thing. It has nothing to do with my relationship with Christ. My body is breaking down, okay? And the older we get, the worse we become. And by the way, if you do not treat mental illness, if you do not treat depression, and it's a serotonin issue, or it's a dopamine issue, and it's a neurotransmitter issue, it will only get worse as time goes on. Okay, that's the idea of mental illness. Left untreated, mental illness goes worse for everybody. So it's something you don't want to ignore. Okay, now here's the thing. You might have had bad experiences with doctors in the past that don't know what they're doing. Okay, and I get that. There's a lot of doctors that are just MDs, and they were prescribing antidepressants, and they're not knowing what they're doing. If you think you have depression, you need to see a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist, okay? You need to see a professional. And if you don't like what one guy says or one lady says, then go get a second opinion, okay? Because we're dealing with a health issue, not a spiritual issue, okay? That's what we have to understand. This is more than you feeling down. This is more than you feeling the blues. You're starting to have a breakdown in your body, okay? So that's what we have to understand. So when you have these imbalances in your serotonin and dopamine levels, it's going to contribute to this. So what going to a doctor will do, a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist, is they can get your levels back to normal, okay? They can get your biology and your chemistry back to normal. And once you start functioning on a normal level, then you maintain that, okay? And then at that point, we then look at, okay, what is the psychological pattern that you're thinking? What is the belief pattern you're thinking? Because that needs to be tackled as well. Because here's the interesting thing. Your psychological thinking, or what you believe, can make you depressed. And if you have depression from the neurotransmitters, it can also affect your thinking. So it's a two-way street. Bad thinking, bad believing can affect and cause you to be depressed. Depression can also cause you to think wrong and to believe wrong. So you have to understand it's a two-way street. So this is what you're dealing with. So you have to attack depression on both fronts. You have to attack it on the front medically, and then you have to attack it on the other front from a belief or psychological, cognitive level. What is the person thinking? Okay? How are they thinking? How are they viewing God? How are they viewing reality? How are they viewing themselves? How are they viewing others? Okay? All of that has to be addressed. So that's why if you're struggling with depression, it's not a one or either or. It's I'm going to go see a psychiatrist for my serotonin and dopamine so they can check my levels there. And then I'm also going to talk to a therapist and figure out if what I'm believing matches reality. If what I'm believing is caused from trauma, or I'm not, I don't have proper boundaries, or I don't see the world correctly. I haven't embraced the fall, or I haven't grieved over a particular issue of a loss in my life. Whatever the issue might be, right? Those things have to be flushed out. Those things have to be addressed. And this is where the responsibility of the person who's depressed comes in. And I know if you're depressed, you don't feel like doing anything. You don't feel like talking to anybody. You sometimes don't even feel like getting out of bed. You don't feel like moving forward, right? You feel stuck. You feel hopeless. You feel like you can't change anything. There's no hope. There's no outlook on life. It starts caving in on you, and you go to a very dark place. I get that. I understand that. But at some point, you have to say, I don't want to feel this way anymore. I need to get fixed, okay? Do not let depression take you into such negative feelings as to where life is not worth living, people don't care about me, I've given up all hope, I wish I were dead, and start having suicidal thoughts. That's the wrong thing, because that's where depression will lead you. And so we want to make sure you don't go there. So at some point, you have to say, I don't want to feel bad every day anymore. I want to change this. And you need to make a phone call to a good psychiatrist and start the process, get a phone call into a therapist and start the process of getting out. And by the way, you can get out of it. You can get out of the depression. Some of you might have to be on medication the rest of your life. So be it, okay? Some of us have to be on heart medication for the rest of our lives. Some of us have to be on pain medication for the rest of our lives. We got to do something because this is survivable. This is something you can get past. You can get your serotonin and dopamine levels back to normal. You can get to a good therapist and start thinking and believing correctly. You can talk to your pastor and start believing, the right things instead of the negative things that you're thinking about when you're depressed, and you can get on the right track. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to continue this discussion next time. I'm going to go into more of the psychological aspects of depression and some of the common things that lead people in their thinking to depression. But like I said, it might be that depression is causing you to think this way, or you're thinking this way and it causes depression. So either way, you got to address the issue. So we're going to talk about it next time from a psychological standpoint. Anyway, until next time, remember what the scripture says, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, and that which is good and acceptable and perfect. We'll see you next time. Hey everybody, I just want to invite you to partner with us financially in our ministry. It takes a lot of work and effort and finances to put a production on. We have to travel to locations. It's one thing to visit, it's another thing to live here. We have to pay people to do video editing, to film things, to put it all together, and it takes a lot of resources to do that. But we see it as God's calling us to get the truth out.
It's good to be here with you guys in Ireland, all the way from the United States.
And so if the Lord puts it on your heart to help us, partner with us in getting the truth out, getting information out, we would really appreciate that. Any donation of any size is tax deductible and will definitely go to helping get the word out.